updated favorite spring palettes for the year of 2023. I like filming these every season now, and I kind of like filming an updated version of my favorite palettes seasonally. This is the best way I am able to rotate my palettes in my collection now. Is if I think about what palettes I can use seasonally, it gets me to pull out palettes that I'm not using as much and really just think about using them at this time of year. So I'm going to talk about I have 16 eyeshadow palettes here. There are quite a few that I would like to focus on to use more this spring that I'm going to make a priority. I have used a few of these palettes already. I've used 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 out of the 16. So that's not terrible. That's almost half actually. But some of them are newer palettes to me, so I wanted to share the newer palettes with you guys as well as old favorites in my collection. So first we're going to start out with ColourPop. I don't think I had this palette last year, but this has definitely become one of my spring staple palettes, and that is the Lilac You A Lot palette. I just love lavender pinky vibes for the springtime, and this is definitely one of the palettes that I would like to use and whip out again during this time of year. I think it's a absolutely gorgeous color story for this time of year. I don't know why I keep on struggling with getting this shade back in the pan every time that I show it, but it's really, really pretty. It has some really pretty more mid-tone shades in here. I love like this lavender matte. This one I usually use every time that I use this palette, but I really like the way that this palette is curated. Yes, some of the looks are going to look similar, but I don't find them to be repetitive or boring for me because I do like that we have these two deepening purples in here, so we have enough depth and dimension. I find that those are the only two I really need. I also think ColourPop is really good at creating like the tones of mattes to go with the shimmers really well. Like their mattes are always like a different variation. Like if they are doing like more like a green based palette, the deepest matte will be like an olivey green or like a olivey brown. It'll still have like a green undertone to it. You know what I mean? So these shimmers are beautiful. Really want to jump back into this palette for the springtime, and I am hoping to use it very, very soon because this is going to be a really pretty one for this time of year, and I do intend to use it a couple of times at least. So that is the first one. Definitely want to use that. That's why I wanted to mention it first. This one is one of my used ColourPop palettes in my collection, and that is the Or Kid You Not. I just wanted to throw this one in again because I actually have not touched this palette this year yet. I used this was one of my most used palettes last year though, because this was like one of the first palettes that I got to use last year because I got it around, I think it was either November or December last year, and it was the first palette that I used in the year of 2023. I used this on like January 1st or something. And I love this palette. It's beautiful, super pigmented. I've raved about this palette a million times. But I think that this is a great year-round color story. And again, if you're looking for something that's like more berry toned and you don't want to spend too much money on a higher end, more expensive palette, I would just go with this one because the quality is delicious in here. It's just beautiful quality. I recommend this palette all the time. I hope that you can still get this one, but not all of these palettes might be available, by the way. I'm sorry. I'm just mentioning the palettes that I want to get more use out of in the springtime and what's in my personal collection. If you can't get some of these palettes, I'm sorry. I didn't look up all of them, but this palette's amazing. I hope you can still get that one, though. I'm not sure if that one's available either, but pretty sure it is, but correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, another spring staple palette that I mention all the time in the spring is the Sweet Talk palette. This was one of my first palettes from ColourPop. I think this was like my 4th palette from them. I'm not going to spend too long talking about this one because I still need to repress this shade. But this is such a beautiful spring color story. And I do like whipping this out at least, hopefully once, possibly twice during the springtime. I usually always end up whipping this out at least once. But I want to use it a lot more, hopefully maybe twice. Like, I'm not trying to, you know, go leaps and bounds and use everything a ton, but I think 16 palettes is a really good, not just number, but variety of palettes that I can focus on that I want to use this spring. And it's not like too overwhelming of a number, because that's like 3 months of using 16 palettes, which is great. I love this palette. I love that it's more mid-toned pinky shades. And the neutrals in here are just more different for ColourPop. They've never really come out with a color story quite like this, since this one, obviously, it's not going to be exactly the same. But they can dupe themselves sometimes. But I just thought that this palette was very well curated, and it was very well loved by a lot of people for good reason, because this color story is so beautiful, and I just always get the spring vibes every time that I look at this palette. And it did come out in the spring, I believe, like 3 years ago, and it's still a spring staple for me. So I really want to be able to jump back into it at some point. Okay, next one from ColourPop is my Limoncello palette. This one has just become a spring and summer staple for me as well. This was one of my most used palettes last year. This was probably my most used spring palette last year. So I haven't been able to dip into it this year yet, but I would like to use this. But I probably will only be able to use this maybe once, and then I am planning on taking this to California with me, so that's when I'm going to get more use out of it. So this one isn't like a top priority for me to use at the current moment. But I do want to dip into it again because I love this color story. It is mostly neutral tone with a pop of yellow and blue, but these shimmers are stunning. Capri is just gorgeous, and they just have some beautiful tones in here. The metallics are great in here, so sorry. Still getting over this cold, you guys. But this palette is just really pretty for the springtime, and I can see why, again, this palette was so popular at the time, because it's a beautiful color story for this time of year. And every time I start bringing out spring palettes, this is one of the first ones that comes to mind. And the metallics are just wonderful quality, and the mattes are really good too. And how can you not love this packaging? This is some of my all-time favorite packaging from them. It's just so pretty, and I really get like the Italian limoncello vibes from this. I literally could see myself taking this to Italy if I ever go back, but I really do want to bring this to California with me. So again, that one's not like a #1 priority for me to use, because I know I'm going to bring it traveling, so... Okay, then the next one is the Flirty Talk palette. Now, this one came out in February, so obviously it was for Valentine's Day, because this was their Valentine's Day collection. But when I look at this palette, I really do get some spring vibes from this palette, and I really would like to whip it out again to use during the spring, because I really want to do like some type of pink focused look with this palette for this time of year. Because y'all know that my favorite colors to use in the spring are greens, pinks, and lavenders. So this seems to be the perfect palette to me to use. And the metallics in here are really beautiful. This shade, Be Mine, is so gorgeous. It's like this really flaky new formula that they have. And this is the only palette that I have this formula in. I forget what it's called, but it's stunning. But I really do want to do something with this spring. So I'm hoping to use it when I wear something pink, obviously. But it's a really pretty palette, and I like the quality of this one. So I would like to use it again. I only got to use it in the month of February, so I haven't used it since then. But I would like to whip this palette out and use it more this spring. Okay, then the next one is the Snow White Dreams Come True palette. As soon as I saw this palette, I knew I was going to put it in this video because it is a really pretty... Oh my god, why is this driving me freaking bonkers? My hair is driving me nuts right now. First world problem. So this is the Dreams Come True Snow White palette. And what's funny is that, like, I really do want to put this in this video because, and in my spring palettes, because I do think it's a really pretty spring palette. But I have been wanting to go back into this palette more so than I thought I wanted to, because I thought that this palette was very, like, kind of boring, honestly, but I think that the quality in this one is really, really nice, so that's why I want to go back into it more. And also, I just want to get some more use out of it, and I am intending on using it tomorrow for class anyway, so I'm already going to be using it more. I have dipped into it a couple more times since I've tested out all the shimmers. Like, I've used these two again, but I would like to use it a bit more. And again, it's a really pretty, like, neutral-ish spring palette, so I think that this is going to be a really pretty one for the springtime, so that's why I decided to put this one in the video. And also the packaging is just absolutely stunning. And they also just sneak peeked a new Disney collection for the springtime, and it's an Alice in Wonderland collection. And I saw the palette, and I feel like that's going to be one that I use in the spring too, so that's why I want to, like, prioritize some other ones as well before I get that one, because I'm 100% picking that up. But this one I do want to use more. Okay, the next one I actually used a couple of days ago, so I don't have to prioritize this one too much, but I do want to use it at least once, possibly twice more in the spring, and that is the Winnie the Pooh Sweet as Can Be palette. I'm pretty sure I put this in my last year's video as well. This one I just get such spring vibes from, and this was their Disney collection for the spring last year, so it makes perfect sense to put it in this video as well. It's just such a pretty palette, you guys. And when I was able to use it a couple days ago, and I actually have a full get ready with me using this collection, just chatting with you guys about the Sephora VIB sale and what's on my wish list, and that'll be coming before this video or after, I'm not sure, but you guys will be able to see a look with this. The quality is so good in this, and I was able to refresh my memory on how much I really like this palette. It's just really pretty. The shimmers are so smooth, and there's just something about the shimmers in here that are just so pretty, and they have that really smooth metallic formula, and the mattes just blend so nicely, and they're just really, really easy to use. So I really like this palette. I'll swatch like one of them for you guys. This one is called Sing Ho, and it's just the metallic quality is just so nice. I kind of wish that they had this metallic quality in a lot of their other palettes, because these are just so soft and smooth metallics. It's just a really, really adorable spring palette, and I just get the spring vibes every time I look at this palette. And the packaging, again, I have raved about this packaging so much. It's amazing. 10 out of 10 for me. It's just adorable, and I love that it's a 10 pan. So, and then the last one from ColourPop is the Lust for Dusk palette. Now, I have used this palette a ton. This is one of my most used from last year, and this is one of my all-time favorite ColourPop palettes, but I want to put it in my spring palettes because I do want to use this again. I am planning on using this again with a sweatshirt that I like wearing it with, that it has like the gray and pink and orange tones in it, and it goes perfectly with this palette. This palette is just such beautiful quality. The shimmers in here are insanely beautiful. They're like super sparkly and wet and smooth and metallic. And I absolutely love this color story. I've raved about this palette like a gajillion times. But it's just so different for ColourPop. I really wish that they would come out with something similar to this at some point. But I love this palette, and I really want to try and do something with it this spring. But it's not an absolute top priority for me because, again, I have used this palette a lot because I freaking love it. But I have not used it this year yet, so I would like to dip back into it soon. So those are all the ColourPop palettes. So now let's go into a couple from Onenzai because I do have 3 palettes from Onenzai here. Now, even though this palette isn't my favorite formula-wise, I do really get the spring vibes from this palette, and that is the Flora Story palette by Onenzai and Makeup Just for Fun. And this palette is just such a pretty spring color story because it has greens and it has purples in it. And you just really do get the spring vibes from this. It is a beautiful color story. I just wish that there was a little bit more depth and dimension in this one. But I find that I don't really need anything else. It's just the mattes are so freaking powdery in here. But I would be lying if I didn't say that this is a really pretty spring palette. And I do kind of want to do another like lavender purple look with this. So I do want to dip into the purples again. But they're just so difficult to work with. The greens are definitely easier to work with, but they're still very powdery. And I have used this palette quite a bit since I've gotten it. Like, I've used all the shimmers. And I did get to dip into it one more time. This is the only shimmer I've used twice, and it's beautiful. But I would like to dip into it again. I might even want to do like a purple and green look like together and use some of the greens and purples, like maybe do green on top and purple on the bottom, like something like that. I want to see if I can like, you know, play with the color story more and create something that I wouldn't normally do. But also I kind of want to see if the mattes are going to work together that way. So if they don't, I'm not really sure if I'm going to dip into this palette again, but I got this palette because I love Amanda, but the quality isn't really there. Now, with this one I could go with spring and summer. This one I find almost is more of a spring summer, like on the cusp kind of palette, like similar to the Lust for Dusk. Like Lust for Dusk is like the perfect like summer into fall palette, like that transition period. But I certainly want to bring this out in the spring again, and that is the Batty Bean and Onenzai palette, and this is the Planet Spirit palette. And the quality with this one is definitely there with this palette. I've talked about this palette quite a few times. The mattes are super punchy and beautiful, and the shimmers are really, really stunning. But the mattes in here just are so easy to use, and it's crazy like how much better this palette is compared to the Flora Story one. But I prefer this color story over, I actually prefer the color story in the Flora Story palette. But this one is just, the quality is amazing, and this is the Onenzai quality I'm used to, and the mattes are just so freaking good and so pigmented. And that is the shade Kingdom. But I really want to use this again. So I've only been able to use all the shimmers once. Jeez, oh my god, what are you... My hair's driving me freaking bonkers. Yeah, but I really want to use this again, so we don't have to talk about it anymore. I literally just took them out like an hour and a half ago. But that was like 1:30, so whatever. Okay, I gotta hurry this up because I have stuff to do today. It's already 3 o'clock and I've been spending like 2 hours in my room doing my makeup and everything. So, the last one from Onenzai I'm just gonna mention quickly. Again, this one isn't an absolute priority for me to use because I've actually used this. I did use this like a couple of weeks ago. So I did already dip into this, and I've used this quite a bit last year. But this is the Hello palette from Angelic Nyquist and Onenzai. And the reason why I'm not going to spend too long on it is because you can't get it anymore. But I did want to mention it as one of my favorite spring palettes because y'all know, like I said, my favorite spring shades to use are greens and pinks. So there's pinks in here and there's greens in here. It's absolutely gorgeous. I've created such beautiful looks with this palette. I love the different color combinations that you can create with this. I've done pink and green looks together. I've done pink looks. I've done green looks. I've done darker looks. I've done cooler tone looks. It's a wonderful palette. My favorite shade is Venom. It's just such a gorgeous palette. She really is a color genius when it comes to putting color stories together. And I love this shade. But this is a wonderful quality palette, and this is the quality from Onen's Eye that I expect because it's beautiful. And it every time I use this palette, I'm like, I don't know if I should put those colors together, and then when I do, it always turns out so much better than I was expecting because the shades just work beautifully together, and I love this palette. So I definitely had to put this one in here because it's still one of my favorite spring palettes. So that's this one. Okay, 5 more palettes. So this one, I've already been using this palette a ton, and I just want to use it even more in the spring. Honestly, if I didn't have any of these other palettes, this would probably be my most used spring palette. And it pretty much is because it is my newest palette to my collection. But if I didn't have any other palette that screams spring to me than this one, it's the Cosmic Brushes Muse palette. I mean, I know a lot of people have been raving about this brand, and they've been, they can't shut up about it, and it's been selling out so much, but for good reason. This palette is fantastic quality. I have been absolutely loving this palette, and I just feel like this palette screams spring to me because hello, we have pinks and greens in here. I mean, of course, those are my favorite colors to use in the springtime. I just used this palette yesterday, and I just love it. I've been using it a ton. I have pretty much tested out all the shimmers in here except for one on my lid, which is this shade Inspire, but I have used it on my inner corners. Just the quality of these shimmers are just so silky smooth, and the mattes are just so easy to use and so velvety smooth and pigmented and blendable. And I feel the same way about the color combos in this palette that I do about the Hella palette, because when I'm putting color combos together with this palette, I'm like, oh, I don't know how well those colors are going to go together. And then when I actually do it and put it on my eyes, I cannot tell you how well they work together. Like, all of these are so cohesive, especially in the matte selection. I mean, I do wish that there was a purple matte in here. That's the only thing I would change. I would swap out this yellow for a purple matte. And then this palette would have been perfection to me. I mean, it's already perfection with the performance and quality. It's just freaking stunning. This patina shade is probably still my favorite. That's the one I used in my first impressions video. I've only been able to post one look with this, which is just the first impressions video, but I have been using this palette a ton off camera, and I love it. It's absolutely phenomenal quality. I can't recommend this enough. For the price, you will not be disappointed. I don't think I've seen any negative reviews on these palettes because the quality is fantastic. And I only have like 3 more shades to use. These 2 mattes. Actually, these 3 mattes. I don't think I've used this one either. I need to use this one. This would be a really pretty neutral one. Why haven't I used that? I'm kicking myself. I should have used that one as well. But I haven't used this one, and this one as far as the mattes go. And I haven't used that one on my lid. But I've used all the other shades, and I freaking love it. I'm going to be raving about it a ton this spring, but it is one of the best spring palettes ever. And one of my favorite formulas I've ever tried. It's just fantastic quality for the price. I absolutely love this palette. And I'm not going to shut up about it. Okay. Then the other 2, and then I'm just going to talk about 2 neutral palettes that I'm going to prioritize. But this one I definitely want to dip into more in the springtime, and that is the Nomad Feet Stay Provence palette. I have to mention a Nomad palette every season now. They've become one of my favorite brands, and I can't seem to say no to their releases, and I now have 5 Nomad palettes in my collection. But this one is definitely just such a beautiful spring color story, and I really, really want to use this more this spring. I was not able to do some of the color combos that I really wanted to do with this palette last spring because I believe it came out in like May or June, and I didn't really use it much after like June. I haven't really used this much at all. I did use it in combination with the Verona palette, but I only used a few of the purple mattes. But I really want to jump back into this palette again, and I want to use it a couple of times, but I really want to do a lavender yellow look because I saw Angelica Nyquist do one when this palette first came out. Excuse me. I have to watch her video again using the shades that she did because I want to recreate that look and do that. Because that's one of my favorite looks that she's ever done. And I was like, you know what? I would have never thought about putting those two colors together. Because I'm very, you know, I would be very monochromatic with this and use like the trios and like deepen it up with something. But this palette's wonderful. It's such a beautiful palette. I love the color combinations that you can do with this. And I love, this is probably one of my only pastel palettes in my collection. And it's just such a wonderful spring palette. So I can't wait to jump back into it again. I have been using the Royal Europe palette more. I used that a ton this past week because I was first testing it out and I love it. This is definitely the other Nomad palette I want to prioritize this spring because it's such a wonderful spring palette. Okay, this one I always talk about in the spring, and that is the Give Me Glow Vintage Rose palette. This was their most popular palette for good reason. It's absolutely gorgeous. And if I don't, again, there is not a spring palette that screams more spring to me than this one. Because, again, pinks and greens, my favorite colors to wear in the springtime. Give Me Glow shimmers are insane. They are so beautiful. Oh my god, like this shade Blossom is so insanely beautiful. Just, you cannot beat Give Me Glow's quality. The mattes are also incredible as well. I really don't use this palette too much anymore. I actually end up using the Extra Spicy palette more so in the summertime. That's still my favorite summer palette ever. I don't know if I used this palette last spring, but I don't really end up reaching for it that much anymore, but I really do want to use it at least once this spring. So I talk about this every spring for good reason because it is a spring palette. But I really do want to whip it out and use it again. Okay, and last two, I'm just going to end with our neutral palettes that I want to use. But these are some of my most used, these two are like my most used neutral palettes in the past year anyway. This is probably my most used palette this year, and that is the Glaminatrix Cosmetics Nearly Natural palette. But I really do think that this is a really beautiful spring toned neutral palette. So I'm definitely going to be using it even more. I have used this a ton. And I just love the looks that I create with this. And I've used all the shimmers twice, except for this one and Exposed. But I have been using this a lot for my class days. And it's just such a... Wait, I've only haven't used these two again. But I love like the pinky tones. And again, they're like muted pinky greens. So that's why I think that this is such a pretty spring palette. Pretty neutral spring palette, and the shimmers are insanely beautiful. Probably the best shimmers, that's the shade Exposed, and most metallic shimmers in my collection besides the Give Me Glow shimmers. So absolutely beautiful. I use this palette all the time. I used this palette just this past Friday, so I end up using it at least once a week. So I don't really have to, again, prioritize this palette because I've used it a ton. But I'm probably going to dip into it at least a couple more times in the spring. So And this is definitely like a year-round palette for me, but I really did not think I was going to use this palette as much as I have. But I feel like a lot of people say that about this palette, but because it's wonderful. It's just, and the mattes are really, really nice too. Okay, and then the last one, and this one I always use in the spring and summer. I mean, this was my most used palette last year, so. And I'm probably going to use the new mod as well this spring, but I have to mention the Ambiance palette. I mean, I think I mentioned this in my last spring palettes video, but this is actually the one I'm wearing on my eyes today because it is Easter today, so I'm not going anywhere. So I just wanted to whip this palette out and use it again just to create a simple neutral eye, but I have raved about this palette like a gajillion times on my channel because Sigma's formula is truly wonderful quality. The shimmers are so beautiful and the mattes just blend out so nicely. And they're super smooth. And the metallics are so gorgeous. Some of my favorite metallics I've ever tried. They're just so sparkly and beautiful on the eyes. I just love Sigma. So what I'm wearing on my eyes today is I took Basque on my crease, which is my most used matte shade because the Sigma engraving is almost completely gone in there. So that's how much I've used that one. Then I darken it up with Daylily and then just a little bit of Oasis there as well and a little bit of Oasis on the outer corners because I just needed a little bit more depth. So I just threw that on top. And then I used Enrich and a bit of Sunspot on the outer corners just again to build up more depth. And then for the lid, I just took the shade Midas, which is like such a wonderfully beautiful metallic shade. It's just so smooth and I just love it and it just looks so gorgeous on the eyes. And then for the inner corners, I just threw on Luster and that's all I have on my eyes today. I love this palette. So I did use this a ton last year, but I would like to use it maybe once or twice more this year. Just throw it on for my class days, but I really love this palette as well. And that is it, you guys. Those are all the palettes that I would like to prioritize this spring, or just my favorite spring palettes in general. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm going to go eat some lunch now because I'm hungry. So please like and subscribe. Follow me on my Instagram at CBW819 and check out my Poshmark at the same handle. And I hope you all have a great day. Bye.